I'm Erica and we are back at the Emerald Coast Science Center, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about how the planets and some of the moons got their names. So this is going to be a two-part lesson. So today we are going to go over the 4 inner planets, or the terrestrial planets, and their 3 moons. And then on Monday I'm going to go through the other 4 planets, the gas giants, the outer planets, and they have hundreds of moons. So we'll cover a couple of those. So it'll be a fun lesson. If you guys are more interested in learning about the planets and outer space, we do have a live, it used to be live. There's a planetarium lesson that is in our files. So if you go on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page, you can look up the planetarium lesson where you're inside the planetarium with Cody and Ryan going through all of the different planets. It's pretty cool. But today we're going to dive deeper into the names behind the planets. So first off, I want to talk about the Milky Way. So the Milky Way is the galaxy that we live in. So it makes a big spiral, and our solar system is just in one arm of that spiral. So that means that there's a lot of other planets out there, a lot of other solar systems out there that we haven't discovered yet, or we're just starting to learn about. But for today, we're just going to talk about our solar system. So our solar system has 8 planets, and you guys can see we have Mercury is really tiny, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So you can see the Earth is really, really teeny tiny, especially compared to our sun. And you can see Jupiter is really big compared to Earth. So this is our solar system. So today we're going to talk about these 4 planets right here, the inner planets. And then on Monday we're going to talk about these 4 planets. So you can see the sun is gigantic. It is a star, right? Is it a small, medium, or large star? It looks really large, but it's actually a medium-sized star. There's actually a star called Antares that's in the constellation Scorpius that is 1,000 times bigger than our sun. So it's pretty crazy to think about. But our sun is big to us because we're really close to it. We're the 3rd planet from the sun, whereas Neptune, or it's a little further away, so it's not quite as big. But it's really big to us because we're so close to it. So this is our solar system. We have 8 planets in our solar system. And we used to have 9. Pluto became a dwarf planet in 2006. It was slightly demoted. So we'll talk about Pluto on Monday as well. But we currently have 8 planets. And all these planets have names. And all these planets got their names from the Greeks and the Romans. So it's pretty interesting to think about. And then we have lots of moons. And there's around 200 moons in our solar system. And they keep discovering more. And then we have billions of stars. So there's a lot of stuff out there. So the planets, there are 3 rules to being planets. The first rule is you have to be round or nearly round. The second rule is you have to orbit the sun, and they orbit the sun in the shape of an ellipse, which is like a circle with squished in sides. So they're all orbiting the sun, and then you also have to clear the neighborhood of your own orbit. So as you're orbiting the sun, you can't run into anything else. So this is what disqualifies Pluto, is that he's round, he orbits the sun, but he falls into Neptune's orbit when he's orbiting. And so that disqualifies him and makes him a dwarf planet. And then we have our other 8 planets. So so we'll talk about the 4 of those. And then the last thing I want to talk about is where the names came from. So about 2,000 years ago, we had the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, and there are a lot of astronomers amongst them. And so cultures all over the world had names for the planets, and it was usually the planets we could see. So we could see Mercury, Venus, and Mars because they're close to us. And we can also see Jupiter and Saturn with our eyeball without any help if we know where to look. So if somebody were to point it out in the sky to us, we could look there, and at certain times of the year, we can see the planets pretty well. And a lot of these planets have distinguishing features. So for example, Mars is red. So it's really easy to spot in the sky even now because it's the red dot that's up there. Venus is super bright. So it's really easy to find some of these. So back then, in ancient times, 2,000 years ago, the Romans, the Greeks named the planets after their gods. And then the Romans worshiped the same gods. They just called them different names. So the Romans ended up taking these names, writing them down, and then as the Romans conquered more of Western Europe, they brought their ideas and their culture with them. So it started spreading across Western Europe, and for 2,000 years, people were calling these planets by the names of the Roman gods. And then over time, we got used to calling them that. And to this day, we still call the planets by their names that the Romans gave them. So it's pretty cool. So this is the only thing that's different here, is that they named the planets after Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those are all planets that were named by the Romans. Earth has its own story, which we'll talk about. And then Uranus was actually discovered in 1781 by a British man named William Herschel using a telescope. So Uranus was the first planet discovered using a telescope. And then Neptune was discovered a couple years later in 1846 using mathematics and a telescope. So those two had modern kind of discoverers, but they decided to stick with this Greek and Roman theme. So we'll talk about those on Monday. So the first place that we are going to visit is Mercury. So like I said, we're going to talk about the 4 terrestrial planets and their 3 moons. So Mercury is our first planet we're going to talk about. You can see it's really pretty. These pictures are all from NASA. So it's a very pretty planet. And it's the closest planet to the sun. It's also the smallest planet. So this planet has 2 moons in our solar system that are larger than it. It has Ganymede, which is Jupiter's largest moon, and Titan, which is Saturn's largest moon. Both of those moons are larger than this planet. So it's pretty tiny compared. So Mercury is very pretty, but you'll also see that it doesn't really have any moons or rings. And this is because Mercury is so close to the sun and its gravity is not very strong compared to the sun. So anything that would come over to it, meteors, asteroids, rocks, anything that would become a moon or a ring gets sucked up by the sun and burnt up. So it doesn't have the ability to have these moons or rings because the sun is just too powerful. So unfortunately it's out there alone, but you can see that it's covered in craters and it kind of looks like our moon. And this is because as those asteroids and meteors are passing it to go into the sun, they're hitting it. So it's getting kind of beaten up all the time as these things are going into the sun. So Mercury is named after the Roman god of shepherds, tricksters, and thieves. And it's also the Roman god of messengers. So this planet is, I'll show you a picture of Mercury. This is him. So you can see that he's a pretty happy guy. He's a trickster god. So his name in Greek mythology was Hermes. And he would take these winged shoes that he has, these winged sandals, and he would fly around delivering messages to the gods because he was the messenger. So he'd fly around to Mount Olympus because that was the name of where the gods lived in both Greek and Roman mythology. He would go to Mount Olympus, he would deliver messages, he'd go down to Earth. So he's very, very fast because of these winged sandals. So Mercury is named after Mercury because it is very fast as well. So it is so close to the sun and it moves around the sun very fast. So a year is how long it takes for a planet to go all the way around the sun. Our year is 365 days. Mercury's year is only 88 days. So that's how he moves so fast. His year is 88 days long. The opposite is that he spins in a circle very slow. So our days on Earth, that's how long it takes for our planet to spin in a circle once. Our days are 24 hours. Mercury takes a long time to spin in a circle. So his days are 176 Earth days long. So a year is 88 days. A day is 176 days. So a year on Mercury is actually shorter than a day on Mercury, which is pretty crazy. And this just adds to the fact that he's a trickster god, right? So I have a little story about Mercury. This shows kind of what a trickster he was from a young age. So when Mercury was a baby, he lived in a cave with his mother, and his mother's name was Maya. So they lived in this cave together because Jupiter, his dad, had a lot of enemies, so they were hiding in this cave from the enemies when he was a baby. So he was a couple months old, and he was very smart because the gods are smart immediately as soon as they're babies. So he decided to play a trick because he loved playing tricks. So he wandered out of the cave while his mom slept, and he came across these cows, these beautiful white cows. There were 50 of them, and they were owned by the god Apollo, who was his half-brother. So he decided to play a trick on his brother Apollo, and he stole the cows. And he was very tricky about this because he took branches and leaves and bark, and he tied them to the cows' hooves so that when they walked, you couldn't see the tracks anymore. And then he took brooms and he attached them to the tails so that as they swished their tails, they would erase these footprints, these weird footprints, and make them even harder to recognize. So it was pretty good what he did because he confused Apollo. And then he led all of them out of the the little pasture and into the cave, and he wore little twigs and sticks on his feet as well that made his feet, his little baby feet, look gigantic. So when Apollo came over and saw that his cows were gone, he just saw these giant footprints, and he's like, oh, a giant stole my cows. So he was very confused. But in the morning, when Maya, his mom, woke up in the cave, she was not very confused because she saw 50 cows in her cave, and she's like, what did my son do? It's obviously Mercury's fault. What did he do? So she yelled at him, and he's a baby, remember? So she yelled at him, and he started crying, and he said, Mom, I did it for you. I wanted to worship you because you're my mother, and you deserve better than this cave. So he ended up having to go to Apollo and apologize, but nothing's ever that easy. So there were a couple more adventures along the way, but it ended with Apollo letting Mercury keep the cows, and then Mercury gave him an instrument, a lute, which is kind of like a little guitar. So he gave him a lute, and this became Apollo's most prized possession, and because Apollo was the god of music. And it kind of made their dad, Jupiter, look at Mercury and say, wow, you're something special. Move out of that cave and come up to Mount Olympus and live with the rest of your family. So it was a good thing. So he's a trickster god. All right, our next planet, our second planet from the sun, is Venus. So this is beautiful Venus. Venus is also similar to Mercury in the sense it doesn't have any moons or rings because it's so close to the sun. The sun's gravity pulls them all in. And Venus is named after the goddess of love and beauty. So her name is Aphrodite in Greek mythology. So I have a picture of her over here. So there's beautiful Aphrodite. So this planet is very, very hot, and this is because it has a really thick atmosphere, really thick cloud cover, and this traps the heat. So Venus is similar to Earth in the sense that it has a very thick cloud cover with, well, it has greenhouse gases, which kind of degrade its ozone layer. So Venus has these greenhouse gases like Earth does, and it gets trapped under this atmosphere, and the heat rises and rises and rises. So Earth's atmosphere is not so thick, so we don't have that problem, but we do have greenhouse gases, which kind of eat away at the ozone layer. So Venus, it gets up to 880 degrees, so it's the hottest planet, and it's named after the hottest goddess. So it's an easy way to remember that it's the hottest planet. So Venus also rains acid, because it's just not a very toxic, it's very toxic, it's not a good place for earthlings to be. So it rains acid, and before the acid can actually get to the ground, it disappears, it dissipates. So not a place we want to explore. There have been missions to send things here, and they just burn up because it's so hot. So this planet was actually thought to be two different stars. There was a theory during Roman times that it was a star, a day star, and the morning star and the evening star. So because you can see Venus, it's so bright, you can see it during the morning and the evening. So they thought it was two different stars. They watched it, they tracked its path and followed it, and realized that it's actually not two different stars, it's a planet, because it was doing that ellipse. And they decided to honor it by naming it after the goddess of love and beauty. So here is Venus. And Venus is, she's very famous because she did not come from Zeus or Jupiter. He was not her father. Her father was actually Uranus, who was the god of the sky, so we'll talk about him later. But she was born, and she came to the shores of an island called Cyprus, which is off the coast of Greece. And there's actually a big stone, a big rock in Cyprus, and there's a myth about that rock that if you go to Cyprus and swim around it, every lap you go around the rock makes you 1 year younger. So it's kind of a cool thing. So if you ever are in Cyprus and you swim around the rock, you can, be any age you want to be. So pretty cool. So Venus was very beautiful, and Zeus, Jupiter, was afraid that a war would start between the gods as to who would marry her. So he ended up giving her to his son, Hephaestus, in Greek mythology, Vulcan in Roman mythology. So Vulcan was the god of volcanoes and blacksmithing. And Hephaestus was a very, very kind, nice, gentle god. He had big muscles from, blacksmithing and making weapons, but he was always very dirty because he's in his workshop and he's covered in soot and, all kinds of stuff. So she didn't really like him very much because he was very nice, but he was just kind of gross and stinky and sweaty all the time. So, but he ended up, loving her because she's this beautiful goddess. So Hephaestus, Vulcan, would make her jewelry all the time and try to win her affection and win her heart. So sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but she did end up having a son, and her son is very famous, and I guarantee you've heard of him. His name is Cupid, And Cupid is famous for having little wings, and he flies around and he shoots with his bow and arrow. He shoots little arrows of love at people's hearts. So he's also a trickster god. So the thing about Cupid's arrows is that if it hits you, you will fall in love with the first thing you see, if it's an animal or a person. So there's lots of stories in Greek and Roman mythology about Cupid hitting someone in the heart with their arrow, and they fall in love, and then they go and they tell their family about their beautiful fiance and how much they love her, and they can't wait to marry her, and then he'll introduce his fiance to the family, and it's a goat. So it happens. So Cupid's a trickster, and then eventually the magic of the arrows would wear off, but there's some pretty funny stories about it. So that is Venus. All right. Our next planet, you should be familiar with this planet. It is where we live on planet Earth. You guys can see that it is really beautiful and blue. Earth is made of about 74% water. So it's known as the blue planet. There's a couple other blue planets out there, but we're the only one with this much liquid water. So pretty cool. So this is our planet. We can see the green, the land, the trees. Our planet has water, it has oxygen, and it has carbon dioxide, which are all things we need to live and thrive and for our plants to grow. So it's a very, very important planet. And it is the only planet not named after a Greek or Roman god. So this planet is actually, it's thought that it comes from the word Erda, which in Anglo-Saxon language means earth or dirt. But there's also a theory that it comes even more ancient. It comes from Norse mythology. So there's a thought that it comes from the goddess Jorth, who was the mother goddess in Norse mythology. So here's a picture of Jorth. So Jorth was very beautiful, and she was very, very powerful. And Odin, who was the god of, the king of the gods in Norse mythology, he wanted her to be his wife, and he wanted to have a baby with her, because if they had a son together, that son would be stronger than any of the other Norse gods. So Odin decided that he would woo her. He would try to make her fall in love with him. So he ended up promising her billions of flowers. If you marry me, I will give you billions of flowers. And she just laughed, because she's Mother Earth. She already has billions of flowers. And he's like, well, if you marry me, I'll give you hundreds of children. And she laughed again. And she's like, I have billions of children. Like, So he just, every day, every night, he tried to win her over. He tried to tell her how much he loved her. And eventually she gave in and she married him. So they ended up having a son together. And this son ended up being very, very famous and very powerful and very strong. And he has a hammer. His name is Mjolnir, and I'm sure you've heard of him. His name is Thor. So this is Thor's mother, Jorth, the earth goddess, and she takes care of all the plants and animals that live on Earth. So Thor, he didn't know the name of his mom for a very long time, because Odin kept it a secret, because if Thor found out, he would realize how powerful he was, and he might overthrow his dad and take the throne, so it was a secret for a while. So that's why his mom's not Jorth in the movies. But yeah, so Jorth is his true mom, so pretty cool. So one thing that I wanted to mention real quick is that even though this pandemic, like the coronavirus, kind of stinks because we're at home, we're quarantined, like we don't have school, a lot of our jobs are working from home. So even though all of this sad stuff is going on in the world, one good thing that's happening is the Earth is actually healing right now, because there's not as many cars on the road sending their emissions into the air. There's not as many planes flying. People are staying home, and so the Earth is healing. So we currently have holes in our ozone layer, and those holes are actually starting to repair after such a short amount of time. It's pretty incredible. So, so it kind of stinks being stuck at home, but in a way, it's allowing for the Earth to heal herself a little bit. And, we want to take care of the Earth. So keep recycling, keep doing good things, keep planting trees. So yeah, that's the Earth. All right. So we are actually going to go visit our very first moon. So our moon is named Luna. That's her official name. And she is the first moon closest to the sun. So she's pretty big for a moon. She is actually a quarter the size of our planet. So if the Earth would be a nickel, like the size of a nickel, the moon would be about the size of a coffee bean. So she's pretty big compared to us. There's a theory that a long time ago, billions of years ago, something really big hit the Earth, knocked a chunk of it off, and it ended up becoming our moon. And moons are just natural satellites, so they're just things that are caught in the orbit and start orbiting a planet. Moons can orbit dwarf planets. They can also orbit asteroids. So it's just orbiting something bigger than itself. So we only have one moon, but she's really, really special to us because she does a lot of things for us. So first off, you can see that she's covered in craters, and these craters are caused by meteors and asteroids. So if the moon didn't exist as a shield, they would all hit the Earth. So she protects us. So it's really nice of her. She also controls our tides. So the tides push and pull. The gravity from the moon pushes and pulls on our waters and our waves, and it creates high tide and low tide. And the moon also slows us down. So if the moon didn't exist, Earth would spin in a circle so fast, we'd only have 8 hours in a day. But the moon slows us down, so we have 24 hours in a day, which is really important. So the moon is named after the Roman goddess of the moon. So her name is Luna, and she is a very beautiful goddess. She has a big brother whose name is Sol. That's the sun. And so Sol is actually where we get the name solar system from, because Sol translates to system of the sun. So pretty cool. And that's something that I forgot to mention at the beginning, is where we get the name planet from. So planet is actually, it comes from the Greek term plains aster, and plains aster means wandering stars. So all the planets were thought to be stars. And then as the Greeks watched them, they realized that they were moving in this pattern in the sky. So they decided they're not stars, they're something new. So they call them plains aster, wandering stars, which is where we get the name planet from. So pretty cool. So anyway, Sol is her big brother, and Sol is very big and fiery. And Luna is more calm and peaceful and serene. So she was thought by Roman times to have a chariot with 2 horses, and this is how she pulled the moon across the sky, was with her chariot. So she had one horse was black and one horse was white, and that's how the Romans explained you can see the moon in the daytime and the nighttime, because the white horse represented day, the dark horse represented night. So that is how they explained it. The moon is really cool too, because it is the only place in our solar system that we have actually walked on. So pretty cool. So in 1969, the Apollo 11 mission was the very first mission to land on the moon. There were 3 men that were involved in this mission. There was Buzz Aldrin, there was Neil Armstrong, and then Michael Collins was the pilot that stayed up in the spacecraft orbiting as Buzz and Neil were on the surface of the moon doing cool stuff. So they're actually able to stay on the surface of the moon for 21 hours and 36 minutes. And during that time, they were on the surface collecting moon rocks and, doing all kinds of experiments and just exploring, bouncing around, because the gravity's different up there. So they had a lot of fun on the moon. So that was our first successful mission to the moon, was 1969, so about 50 years ago. So since then, 12 people in total have walked on the moon. This has been American astronauts, Russian cosmonauts, and Chinese astronauts. So we've had 12 different men that were up on the moon. Anybody notice what's weird about that sentence? 12 different men, right? Only boys, not fair. So in 2024, NASA is actually sending the Artemis mission to the moon. And Artemis is Apollo's twin sister. So Apollo, the Apollo 11 mission, all the Apollo missions are named after the god of music, who's also associated with the moon. So the sun. So they're actually going to send the Artemis mission. Artemis is the goddess of the hunt in Greek mythology, and she's also a goddess of the moon. So they're sending the Artemis mission to 2024 is their target year, and it's the first woman to walk on the moon. So they're gonna send a woman and a man, and they're gonna go up to the south pole of the moon, which has never been explored. So keep your eyes open. 4 years from now, we might have our first woman on the moon. So pretty cool. All right, let's talk about our last planet. So this is Mars. He is named after the Roman god of war because he's red. So in ancient times, 2,000 years ago, they looked up in the sky, they saw this red dot, and they thought, oh, that must be made of blood, right? Because that's what we think when we see red. So they decided to name it after the war god. So Mars has 2 moons. I'm so sorry I don't have pictures of those, but you can look them up on Google. They're kind of derpy, like they're like lumpy and kind of funny looking, but their names are Phobos and Deimos, and they are named after Mars's sons. So it's thought to be Mars and Venus's sons. And they are the gods of fear, phobia. So Phobos is where we get the word phobia, and dread or panic, Deimos. So Phobos and Deimos. And these 2 gods were, so they're the sons of the war god of Mars, or his Greek name was Ares. So they're the sons of the war god, and they were worshipped in battle a lot. So Alexander the Great, who's a very famous general, he worshipped them. King Leonidas of Sparta. So if any of the parents out there have seen 300, that's the leader of the Battle of Thermopylae. So the Spartans would worship Phobos and Deimos. So if you actually ever go to Sparta, there's a statue of Leonidas with Deimos on his shield. So they loved these gods because if you had fear and panic on your side in battle, that meant the other army would be full of fear and panic and they would run away. These two gods are also seen in the Disney movie Hercules. So if you guys know that movie, Hades has two little buddies, Pain and Panic. So that's these two moons, Phobos and Deimos, are Pain and Panic. So kind of fun to remember. So Mars is not red because it's made of blood. It's actually made of rust. So Mars is soil. It's a terrestrial planet. It's made of rock and metal and all kinds of stuff. So the soil is made of iron, and Mars billions of years ago had a lot of water on it, kind of similar to Earth. Over time, the soil got wet and it oxidized, so it turned to rust. And then the water also evaporated. So Mars still has water. It's in two frozen ice caps. It has a North Pole and a South Pole just like us. So it has two frozen ice caps on it. But the soil that got wet a long time ago, it rusted and it stayed there. It didn't go anywhere. So it'll blow around. These big black spots you see are windstorms. Mars is famous for having windstorms. So it's just this big rusty planet. And if you actually dig a couple inches down, the dirt's gray. So the planet is actually gray, but it's just covered in this layer of rusty dust. So like I said, it's named after the war god. So this is Mars. So his Greek name is Ares, and he was the god of war. And he was a pretty cool god because he was very tall and very strong and very brave, but he was also kind of mean, right? He would pick on people, and he was very vain, so he was very full of himself and into himself. So there's a funny story about him because, you know, he's very tall and handsome, and he was not a great guy because he would flirt with his brother Hephaestus's wife all the time. So his wife Venus, he would flirt with her all the time because he was kind of in love with her. So he wasn't the greatest of guys, and he had a sister. So his half-sister was named Athena, was her Greek name. Minerva was her Roman name, and she was a goddess of war. And they would go to battle together a lot, but they'd be on opposite sides of the battlefield. So he would be fighting with one army, Minerva would be fighting with the other army, and she would try to pick on him because she's his sister. So sisters and brothers pick on each other, right? That's what we do. So she would throw her spear at him, or she would shoot her arrows at him, and she'd usually hit him because she was better in battle than he was. So she would wound him, and they're gods, so they get injured, but you know, they're not gonna die or anything because they're immortal. So she would love picking on her brother and injuring him in the battlefield. So then he would go back to Mount Olympus, to where his home was, crying and screaming, this big, strong god, crying like a baby. And their dad, Jupiter, would get so mad at him. And he'd be like, you're an embarrassment to the family. Stop crying like a baby. And he would just yell at him the whole time. So, and then Minerva would just laugh because it's pretty funny. So he was pretty funny. So one more thing about Mars. We are exploring Mars right now, so we've sent a bunch of probes and rovers up there. The most famous one was Opportunity. Curiosity is still up there right now doing stuff. Opportunity is a really famous rover because it was supposed to go up there and it was supposed to last 90 days, and it ended up lasting 15 years. So Opportunity was just retired last year, not that long ago. So Opportunity sent a lot of data and images of Mars, the surface of Mars, back to NASA. And like I said, Curiosity is still up there. They're doing all kinds of really cool stuff, looking over all these different things on Mars to make sure that we can send a mission there, because they want to send a mission to Mars as early as 2030. So in about 10 years, they want to send people to Mars to walk on it and maybe start colonizing it. So it's pretty cool. So 10 years from now, we might be walking around on Mars. Pretty neat. So to summarize, I talked about the first 4 planets are terrestrial planets and how they got their names. So we have Mercury, the messenger god. We have Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. Earth, the mother earth goddess from Norse mythology. And we have Mars, the war god. So on Monday, we're going to talk about our 4 outer planets. Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods. Saturn, who is the god of time. Uranus, who was the sky god. So he's the grandfather of Jupiter. And then we have Neptune, the god of the sea. So we're going to talk about those 4 gods, and then we're going to talk about Pluto and our dwarf planets, our 5 dwarf planets. So stay tuned. We'll talk about a couple moons. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys on Monday. Thank you.